Hello and welcome to today's webcast. We're delighted to have such a fun topic on the agenda today. Thank you all for taking the time to be with us. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by two guest speakers today, Denise Flory from Verizon and David Wilson from ACI Worldwide. Thank you both for being here. Let me introduce you to our audience before we get underway. And we've got a pretty quick fire format today. We're going to make sure there's a lot of fun conversations, and we're going to ask you an important question at the end of today's webcast. So hold tight for that. So to get us underway, firstly, let me introduce to you David Wilson, who's the Director of Compliance Assurance at ACI Worldwide. David's a risk management and compliance professional with a decade of experience in developing robust risk compliance and audit assurance programs. With efficiency as a primary goal, his focus centers on strategic program development, industry alignment, and collaboration as methods to demonstrate effective risk management. We're going to get into some of that in just a moment. Thank you, David, for joining us. Alongside David, we have Denise. Denise Flory is the Director of Cybersecurity Risk at Verizon. She leads the cybersecurity third-party risk and mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures programs for Verizon, so keeping Denise extremely busy. She's responsible for identifying and reporting on third-party risk, monitoring Verizon's suppliers, and leading merger, acquisition, and divestiture efforts for the corporate information security organization. In addition, is there really time for more? Denise works across enterprise functions such as legal, regulatory, compliance, audit, and supply chain to implement industry standard frameworks that address third-party cybersecurity risk, ensuring that Verizon's customers and networks are protected. Prior to Verizon, Denise worked at Lockheed Martin, leading cybersecurity efforts for the Air Force and Department of Homeland Security programs, and leading cybersecurity projects for Fortune 500 companies in critical infrastructure industries. Wow, that's a lot to cover. Denise, we are so delighted to have you with us this morning. Thank you so much for joining. And today we are tackling a topic which I think is going to prove controversial. Security assessments, are they a waste of time or are they worth it? Trust me, we're not all on the same page as we start this discussions today. So I'm gonna ask David to lead us off. David, can you just start by giving us a little bit of context? How many security assessments does your organization have to complete each year, and how much resource does that consume? And what's the biggest pain point in that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're kind of all over the map on what our assessments look like. We can receive something as simple as a document request or a short questionnaire, or it could be a multi-day in-person SME interview-based audit. And we deal with anywhere from 350 to 500, 600 assessments a year. They can fall anywhere on that scale. So the biggest challenge for us, I think, and the biggest pain point is really with the lack of collaboration with our customers. A lot of times they'll send us questionnaires or an audit request that is a very different business model or assessment model than what we prefer to use. We build a proactive program. We try to share a lot of documentation and be ready for as many audits as we can every year. But when we find that we're not aligned with our customers, it just kind of brings everything to a grinding halt. And we have to kind of start over and say, let's make sure we're speaking the same language when it comes to an assessment so that we can get through it on a collaborative model and both reach a satisfactory end to that. So that's probably our biggest pain point, is just not speaking the same language a lot of times.
Indeed, and I dare say the variety of documents that you get asked to respond to and with is another part of the problem. The lack of consistency, the lack of standardization. Does that factor heavily into your consideration as you think about how efficiently you could run the model and what you're forced to handle at the moment? Is that a familiar story?
It is a familiar story. We base a lot of our materials that we provide proactively off of one standard questionnaire. And we find that 90% or more of the questions that we receive from customers are derived from that same exact questionnaire. But a lot of times they have a little bit of internal flair or something different for that particular organization. And when they send it to us, it doesn't align quite right. And so it still requires a lot of manpower to cross map and get the answers back. So we really look for collaborative models that proactively find ways to reduce the number of questions that need to be asked, when in reality, we're all probably asking based off of the same set of questions with a few tweaks here and there for our different businesses.
We're going to follow up on that in just a moment. Let me ask you one follow-on question, then we're going to come to Denise. David, what role does assessment completion play in the sales process for your organization?
So it's definitely a part of the sales process. We usually go through some form of assessment during sales or RFP processes. And I think every organization manages that a little bit differently. So my team is really focused on assessments after the sale. Once we have a signed contract, we're working to demonstrate compliance to our existing customers. We have a different team that we work very closely with, but they actually respond to those pre-sale assessments. So we have kind of a shared knowledge base that we use, but it is a different team. And sometimes when our customers don't realize that, we have to bring everybody together and make sure we're collaborating across multiple groups, because we don't want to be too siloed. But that is an important element, and we do prepare materials for that as well. We basically, both teams use the same set of information to start. We find that those pre-sale assessments are a little bit lighter than the deep dive assessments post signing the contract.
Yeah, a lot of work with 600 of those conversations to collaborate around every year. Does the assessment really help? Well, we're going to get to that. Denise, looking at the world through your lens, coming at it from the point of view of managing an ecosystem of third parties, each of whom want to collaborate with you. You hope that's what they want to be able to do, and I'm sure you want to be able to do that with them as well. Just to help us understand a little bit of scale of the problem that you have to manage, how many third parties roughly are in your ecosystem? How many of those do you proactively evaluate each year, maybe using an assessment or other tools?
Yeah, so we've got about 6,000 active vendors, and we go through about 600 to 700 assessments per year. Like David, right? We send out a set of questions to a third party and looking to be collaborative on the responses to those.
What's your biggest pain point in the process, would you say, Denise?
Yeah, I would say that probably the quality of the data and validating the responses to the data. We get everything from salespeople trying to answer the questions. And I think, everybody who answers our questionnaire, they are trying to provide good responses. But I think, it depends on who receives that questionnaire as far as the quality goes. I think also validating those responses, right? Some companies are willing to share more than others. And so being able to, get on a phone call, do some screen sharing potentially in instances where we can't get copies of documents, and validate as much as we can.
Denise, with that in mind, how do you handle decision-making around a risk that a vendor represents to your organization? Who's involved in making decisions about whether that vendor does meet the expectations of the business or not? Maybe just help us a little context around that.
Yeah. So what we do is we take everything that we learn about that vendor through the assessment, and we frame a risk profile for that vendor. We identify any gaps in the services that they're providing, any cybersecurity gaps that may exist in those services or products that they're providing. And we present that to the business. We, explain to them what the risk profile is, and work back with the business to, decide. A lot of times the third party, they'll come back and say, hey, we identify a gap. They come back and they say, we can fix this gap, within 3 months, or we can fix it within 6 months. And so we'll take that to the business and say, this is what we've identified. This is what's at risk at this point. And we work with the business to make a determination as to whether or not they're willing to accept the risk that's associated with that.
It really is about understanding appetite for risk, isn't it? And recognizing ultimately There are business owners who are trying to make decisions around bringing on vendors, looking for you to provide professional guidance and expertise, but ultimately retaining the responsibility for making that ultimate determination as to what is or is not acceptable to their part of the business. It's a challenge, and the assessment plays a role in the midst of that. We've got some great questions coming in. So I want to just call out a couple of things. One of the challenges I think we hear a lot about is non-responsive vendors. So the importance of building that risk profile. Denise, you were just sharing that thought, and not every third party is as responsive as we know David and his team would be in completing those many assessments that they're receiving. How do you handle non-responsive vendors who are critical to your particular business processes? Denise, any tips you could share with our audience on best practice there?
Yeah, so we will reach out to the business partner to help set up a phone call if we need to, right? It's really about that collaboration. If the third party wants to do business with us, there are certain things that they've got to go through. We're, one of many risk areas that Verizon assesses when looking at third parties. And so really utilizing that business partner who wants to do business with that third party to help facilitate conversations. And oftentimes it's, maybe they feel like they're being asked too many questions. A lot of times that can be circumvented by having a conversation and saying, look, this is, what we're asking, why we're asking it. And we've been pretty successful with that.
And I'm thinking, David, from your point of view, you welcome a customer who's willing to actually have a live conversation as a way of accelerating the process in general. So best practice on both sides.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we definitely think that having a conversation is really important. Obviously, we provide them a package of information that we want them to read. And we realize it's a lot of information and it's not going to answer every question. So we have, I think, a realistic position that we're going to give you as much as we can, but we know you're probably going to ask some follow-ups. And we ask that there be a realistic expectation on the other side as well, that you're not the only customer asking us these questions. So we have many that are in our queue at any given time. So we try to combat that by quick response up front, saying, 24 to 48 hours, you're going to get initial response with a compliance assurance package. And then we'll try to whittle down all the outstanding questions to something that we can make more bite-sized. Instead of a questionnaire of 350 questions, if you review our package and can bring that down to 20, 30 questions, that'll get you through the queue a lot faster than just expecting us to review every single question, which we've probably already answered in our package. But we realize also that there needs to be that personal touch sometimes, and maybe we do need to go a little bit further occasionally to make sure we're actually helping you find the materials or understand really what the right scope of the assessment should be. One thing that really kind of brings everything to a halt is when you send us a questionnaire and you're asking questions that are not even applicable to the service we provide. So it's important that that scoping be accurate up front so that we're not all wasting a bunch of time on questions that either we've already answered or are just not applicable.
Well said. And I think that gets us to the heart of the conversation for today. Let's be honest, this is a highly time-consuming and resource-consuming process. We've orientated around this concept of an assessment, which is a structured questionnaire to seek to ascertain relevant information to help us run our businesses more effectively and to assess risk. But is the assessment process really producing meaningful results? Let me start with you, Denise. What would be your assessment?
Yeah, so I look at the assessment as one piece of the puzzle, right? We do rely on the responses that we get from those assessments and the artifacts that we're able to validate. For us, that's one piece of the puzzle. We are looking at additional data with regards to that third party, both inside out and outside in data. What can we ascertain about their security practices and whether or not what they've answered in the questionnaire is accurate. And so I do think that it is. I think the assessment is worthwhile. but I see it as one piece of the puzzle.
Thank you. And I mean, in simple terms, is assessment data reliable?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I told you it was going to get interesting.
I would say to a point, right? A company's only going to let you see so far inside with regards to their practices and what they have in place. I doubt that David's going to show up to the table and say, let me tell you, we've got, 300 critical vulnerabilities open on, across these servers, and they've been sitting here for, 3 years. Like, you're not going to find that out with an assessment. And I really think the point of an assessment is to look at the overall entity's security practices that are in place. It's not to do a deep dive on the third party. You're not gonna get reliable data if you're trying to do a deep dive. What we're really trying to look at is, do we believe that that third party has security practices in place that will protect the data that they may be responsible for securing?
Thank you, Denise. That's great perspective. I'm going to come to David in just one second. But before I do, we got another question that came in. And thank you, everyone, for submitting your questions. Please do keep submitting them as we continue the discussion here. The question was, should we be treating SaaS vendors any differently from other types of vendors? I wonder, Denise, what your point of view is on that.
Yeah, so I think that kind of goes back to what I was just talking about. We're really looking at the company and whether or not they have security practices in place that meet our needs. When we start looking at the services that those third parties are providing, then we do look at, cloud solutions differently. We have a whole service risk component that we'll look at with regards to that third party, but it differs from the processes that we go through for what we call an entity risk review, and whether or not we can do business with that third party.
Makes sense. David, from your point of view, is the assessment process worthwhile? Does it result in meaningful results from your point of view?
Well, I would love to say no, because that means I wouldn't be asked questions all the time. But realistically, I think the assessment process is extremely important. Depends on the industry that you work in. You're going to have a different focus. But we are, in the financial payments industry. So obviously, this is an extremely important industry that you need to assess. We try our best to make sure that our customers get the information that they need, that we are transparent as much as we can be. Denise talked about the fact that we're not going to talk to you about what vulnerabilities are showing up in our quarterly scans, and we're not going to talk to you in great detail about what we've done to remediate those. We're going to rely heavily on our maturity as an organization and things like our PCI AOC documentation, and we can talk you through how those things are assessed under our external audits. We're going to rely mostly on that because that demonstrates ongoing year after year maturity of our program. So I think the assessment process is extremely important, and we, in a way, welcome those assessments. We want them to be reasonable and scoped appropriately, but I really focus on collaboration, industry collaboration, because if you're trying to build a program to deep dive audit all of your high-risk vendors, you're going to need a huge staff, you're going to need a huge budget, you're going to miss something along the way, and I think you have a much better opportunity to get a good picture of maturity as well as some of the validated security controls through collaborative models like CyberGRX, that if you came to me and asked my team to give you that, if every customer, all 500 customers wanted to ask for that, and we're answering that every day, all year long, we don't have time to do that. We couldn't do that with the team that I have. So realistically, it's helpful for our customers to rely on those external audits and those industry collaborative models that we proactively participate in, because we use them as an opportunity to be transparent and to work with multiple customers. I think it makes our jobs easier, which is maybe a little selfish, but I also think it helps our customers get a broader look at our security posture as an organization and meet their needs to assess what is probably a large quantity of vendors on an annual basis or every couple of years.
I love the focus there on maturity of the program and seeing that as the key thing that you're seeking to communicate. And from your point of view, Denise, to discern, is this a vendor that actually understands managing third-party risk from your point of view and understands where those risks are presented? And I think that's one component of it. But then there's the other side of it, which is to say, well, where should we focus our efforts to ensure that we are bringing that security level up to a point that is acceptable for both parties? And so I wanted to turn the conversation to talking a little bit about how assessments get in the way of doing that very thing, which is about getting to the insights from the data and not just acquiring the data, which is such a heavy burden. And as we just discussed, the assessment process is like the least of all possible evils, if you will, rather than the best possible approach that one could potentially come up with. But that being said, do we spend more time on collecting data than actually actioning the information? Denise, how does it look from your point of view?
Yeah, we spend a fair amount of time collecting data and are actually in the process of moving over to an exchange that
from a company we might have heard of.
Yes. That's for a few reasons, right? One is the amount of time that we spend doing an assessment. And two is the consistency associated with having an exchange do those assessments for you. You know, they can be validated by a third party. And for us, that provides a lot of value. I mean, David talked about it, right? It's a better process for him, and it's a better process for us.
And an exchange is by definition sort of two-sided. There's the part that you participate in, Denise, which is essentially how do I get access efficiently to data in a consistent format that I can then analyze effectively using tools. But David, from your perspective, looking at the exchange the other way, what value does an exchange present to you in the context of trying to collaborate and communicate effectively with your prospects and your customers?
Well, that's a good question, because our initial exposure to CyberGRX was that we didn't want to get audited again. Well, we get enough audits. Why would I want to participate in this one? And ultimately, we realized a couple of years ago that if we participate proactively, it opens the door for more of our customers to adopt a collaborative model. And we, maybe they aren't ready to do that. Maybe they aren't ready to really put all that effort into migrating into that. But it opens the door to help them understand the value of the collaborative model. And right now we have a handful of customers every year that are coming to us and will accept our CyberGRX report in lieu of doing a direct assessment. I would say that maybe it doesn't answer every question for them. There still might be some things they want to come to us directly for, but it cuts out a large portion of the effort. So we actually have it as one of our program goals to participate with collaborative models. And we schedule that in as an assessment we are planning for every year. One of the biggest challenges for some of our bigger customer audits is that we don't know when they're going to come. They might come and say, we want to do it in January, and we're on a time crunch to get ready for that. Or they may say next year they want to do it late in the year. So we're kind of having to move our calendar around for some of our audits we know that are coming. But for CyberGRX, we can put it on the calendar. We know when it's happening. We can plan for it. I've got multiple team members who are familiar with that model. So we can be consistent with that, just like we're consistent with PCI or ISO. So it's one that really helps us with our planning and our forward thinking from a strategy standpoint of how do we educate our customers on how we approach risk and how we keep their customers' information safe.
Yeah, well, I applaud the approach that you're taking there, David. An interesting data point here is that when the CyberGRX assessment is shared proactively, as you do with your prospects and customers, 7 out of 10 accept that assessment as the basis for that dialogue and discussion, which is a really encouraging statistic, because that means that 7 questionnaires you're not completing out of every 10 that you would be today. So that's helpful. But a question for you, Denise, has come in from one of our listeners today. When using an exchange, are you taking the assessment from it as your sole assessment of risk, or are you using it as a supplement to your assessment? How would you respond?
Yeah, so we are utilizing it as the assessment, but we are supplementing that with additional data. So we've got some outside-in data that we receive. We look at the performance of that supplier if we're already doing business with them. From a cybersecurity perspective, we'll look at their performance of what they have already provided to us and utilize that information. We do also ask for certain artifacts, particularly any sort of industry standard like ISO 27001, SOC 2. We'll ask for those to supplement the data that we're receiving from the exchange.
Thank you. So looking forwards, where do we think third-party risk management is headed? Is there a future that doesn't include assessments, or are they always going to be with us as we continue to evolve and use more and more intelligence to be able to support the important dialogue that we care about with our third parties? Denise, what do you think about that? Where do you see third-party risk management heading? Are assessments always going to be with us? David's
yeah,
I think no, they're going away, but I'm not sure you're going to.
No, I would say that they will always be with us, at least until there's a better solution. It is our one time that we have to ask the third party about their practices and validate their answers. And I think that they can be supplemented with additional data. I think using analytics is the way that we need to go because it is only a point in time. And we need to move to more of a continuous monitoring framework where we're utilizing that assessment data to supplement what we're seeing about that third party. I also think that there is a expectation from federal regulators and customers that we are doing those assessments.
So they'll be with us, but they're not going to be the only thing that we will be building our programs around. I'm going to ask our audience to be ready to respond to a poll in just a moment. We're going to ask you, are security assessments a waste of time or are they worth it? So that's coming right up. In the meantime, David, why don't you share with us your perspective on the future? Does it have to include assessments? Do you think they're going away anytime soon?
I think it does. I agree with Denise. They're necessary. They're going to be a key element of risk management for, I think, ongoing. And I think also, like she mentioned, the regulatory guidance throughout many different jurisdictions is that audits and assessments are going to be really important. You can't take out the human element entirely. I think AI and technology are great. They're helpful. They help us be more efficient. But ultimately, at the end of the day, when it's an individual consumer whose data is at risk, it's hard to just rely entirely on technology. You need people making those decisions on behalf of their customers and their consumers. So I think it's important, but I think strongly focusing on collaboration and utilizing multiple forms of collaboration and collaborating between the assessor and the assessee is extremely important. You can't just send a spreadsheet. It's got to be more than that. It's got to be a relationship.
Well said, and that's going to keep us all in jobs as well, which is a good thing. And here we are, some poll results. Are we shocked and surprised to see? Well, it wasn't 50-50. That was interesting. You guys made a very compelling case, apparently, for ensuring that assessments are indeed worth it. I think you gave some phenomenal qualifiers as to the right way to think about assessments and where they fit. But then 9% of our audience today felt that they are in fact a waste of time. I'd like to hear from that 9% what they recommend as an alternative, or maybe what they're doing as an alternative today, because I think we're all up for best practice. One way for us to wrap up our session today, I want to thank you both so much for the conversation. If you've had one suggestion on how we could improve the process for everyone, what would be your guidance to our listeners today? Denise, let me start with you.
Ooh.
How about David? I see he had a reaction to that.
Well, at risk of offending people, I'll just say read the materials that we provide. We provide an assurance package. It's got a lot of good information in it. I can't tell you how many times people come back and say, well, I couldn't find your access control policy. And I'm like, it's like the first document. So that's one of those things that we're trying to build a package that has got good information and is helpful for you. We're happy to help you walk through it, but please read it. It's going to be very helpful in completing your assessment process that and then use the collaborative materials that we point you towards as well.
Excellent. Nice, straightforward, simple advice. Very good advice too. Denise, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it really is around that collaboration, right? I think, like David talked about, having a package ready to go, because we will utilize that. And, you know, it's really looking at the maturity of the company, not at, you know, not asking them for scan data, right? It's really focused on that.
The key is the relationship itself, isn't it? And supporting and building that relationship together. If in doubt, ask. If you see something, say something. Also good words of advice for us to take on board. Denise, David, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you to our audience. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. We do these on a monthly basis. Please look out for our upcoming event in December. And we hope you like the new format. Please give us your feedback. And if you're interested to learn more about how to apply cyber risk intelligence to your third-party risk management program, we would be delighted to help you. Please reach out for support or come to our website, cybergrx.com. Thank you all so much for your time today. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Denise.
Thank you.